Every legend of a fall begins with a glorious ascent. Before the whispers and the shadows, there was Kaelen of Veridia, a name spoken with reverence in every home. He was not merely a man, he was an ideal, the living embodiment of justice and valor. His reputation was a fortress, built brick by brick from acts of unwavering courage and unimpeachable integrity. The people saw in him the reflection of their highest aspirations, a champion whose moral compass was as true as the northern star. He moved through the world with a certainty that was both inspiring and, in retrospect, profoundly naive. He believed in the inherent goodness of the system he so dutifully served, a gilded champion. His legend was forged in the crucible of the Great Fire of Veridia, a disaster that nearly consumed the city's old heart. Amid the chaos and screaming, as the ancient clock tower groaned its final surrender, Kaelen emerged from a wall of flame. He carried a small child, her face buried in the crook of his soot-stained neck, his own uniform smoldering at the edges. This single powerful image, captured by a stunned journalist, became the defining icon of his era, a testament to a man who would walk through hell itself to uphold his duty. It was this moment that transformed him from a respected officer into a civic saint, a protector cast in bronze and sunlight. His philosophy was simple, absolute. He believed that light would always scatter the darkness, that truth was a singular, unassailable force. He saw the world in stark contrasts of right and wrong, with no room for the murky gray where most of life is lived. But can any man, however noble, truly bear the weight of such perfection? Can a statue built by public adulation withstand the inevitable cracks that form from within? He saw his path as a straight line, a righteous vector aimed at a just future, never once considering the vipers that thrive in the tall grass along the road.
This yearning for flawless heroes is not a relic of the past. We see it today in the pedestals we build for public figures, only to revel in their eventual stumbles. We demand an impossible standard of purity, forgetting the complex, fallible human being beneath the polished facade. Kaelen's story serves as a timeless, cautionary warning about the dangers of idolization, both for the idol and for the society that creates it. His strength was his conviction. It would also become his most exploitable weakness. But the brightest lights always cast the darkest shadows, and a serpent was already coiled at the heart of his perfect world, waiting for the precise moment to strike. Behind the gilded champion stood a man of equal measure. His name was Lysander. He was the brother Kaelen chose, their bond not forged in a palace, but in the grime of forgotten campaigns. At the siege of Oakhaven, with icy sleet stinging their faces in the gray dawn, Lysander took a Northman's axe meant for Kaelen upon his own shield. A bond of brothers. This was more than friendship. It was a covenant written in shared blood and secrets whispered under cold, indifferent stars. Their loyalty was a sanctuary built for two, a place that seemed utterly impenetrable to the outside world. They were two sides of one heroic coin. Kaelen was the brilliant face shown to the masses, lauded for his victories. Lysander was the unseen reverse, steady and essential, giving the whole its true value. He was the strategist to Kaelen's spearhead, the quiet counsel to his bold proclamations. How could such a foundation, built on mutual sacrifice and absolute trust, ever begin to show a fissure? Lysander held Kaelen's deepest fears when the world saw only his unwavering strength. He alone knew the nightmares that plagued the champion in the dark hours before dawn.
This profound trust is a timeless, resonant human need. Even today, we search for that one confidant before whom we can stand unarmored, our true selves exposed without fear of judgment. Their connection was a testament that true strength is not found in solitary glory, but in shared vulnerability. But even the purest gold can be tarnished by the slow, insidious creep of unspoken envy. How does a bond forged in war turn to ash? The trust between Kaelen and Lysander was the bedrock of Veridia's peace. It was assumed unbreakable, a constant in a shifting world. But the brightest light casts the darkest shadow, and within the shadow of the gilded champion, a different ambition was taking root. Lysander, the chosen brother, had watched Kaelen's ascent not just with pride, but with a quiet, meticulous envy that sharpened itself in the dark. He saw the adoration, the power, the legacy, and saw it not as something shared, but something to be taken. The betrayal was not a crime of passion, it was a masterpiece of cold artistry. The king's decree was read under a cold winter moon, Lysander's signature a black gash on the parchment, accusing Kaelen of high treason. Kaelen felt the chill not from the air but from the silence of guards who once hailed him. Forged letters, paid whispers, and a planted dagger were all the proof the panicked court required. Lysander stood beside the throne, his expression a mask of feigned sorrow, as the champion of Veridia was stripped of his titles and bound in chains, the trust broken. What poison takes root in a heart to make it destroy the one who trusts it most? Could a decade of shared blood and bread be erased by a single night of ambition? The gilded armor was more than metal, it was honor, and honor Lysander methodically dissolved in lies. The brothers' bond, once Kaelen's greatest strength, had been repurposed into the perfect weapon against him.
It was the key that unlocked every defense, the familiar voice that silenced every alarm, letting the dagger slide home without a struggle. From pinnacle to pit, Kaelen's world collapsed in hours. This ancient story of a friend's treachery echoes today, where digital whispers and curated falsehoods can dismantle a reputation overnight. The tools change, from forged letters to doctored images, but the wound of an insider's betrayal remains a uniquely human pain. It reminds us our greatest vulnerability is often the person we let closest. Disbelief was the first wave, a crushing tide of confusion that left him gasping in the dark. Horror followed, cold, sharp. But as the days bled into weeks in that lightless pit, a third, more terrible thing began to form in the ruin of Kaelen's heart. It was not despair. It was resolve, forged in the freezing dark, honed by the memory of a brother's smile. The champion was gone, but what was being born in his place was something far more dangerous, and it now had only one purpose. What sound does a soul make when it shatters? The sound of absolute silence. A void where a name once lived. Lysander. A shard of glass in his throat. He traced the mortar between the cold stones of his cell, damp seeping into his fingertips. A single drop of water echoed in the dark, a sound more constant than his heartbeat. This cage reflected the prison built from his brother's lie, stripping him of name, future, and past. The memories came unbidden, twisted into cruel mockeries. Laughter by a campfire now sounded hollow. A glance across a battlefield felt like a cold calculation. Was it all a lie, every vow, every moment of trust that defined his existence? He saw the dagger not just in his back, but in every handshake, every smile they had ever shared. It was a poison working backward through time, corrupting all it touched. The dagger's work. He was no longer Kaelen of Veridia.
That man was a ghost, a champion whose honor lay in pieces, condemned by the one man he would have died for. He was a cautionary story told to children. The anatomy of such a wound is timeless, a betrayal that rewrites a person's history. We see its echoes today in the devastation that follows profound personal deceit. But grief is a finite ocean. In its deepest trenches, pressure forges strange things. Sorrow did not fade, it calcified, it hardened into something sharp, focused. The echoes in the abyss of his despair began forming a single resonant note of purpose. And from the champion's ashes, a different, much darker fire began to burn. Grief can be a fire that cleanses or one that forges a weapon. For Kaelen, the abyss of silence left by Lysander's betrayal was not an end, it was a crucible. In the scorched training yard where they once sparred as brothers, Kaelen knelt in the cold ash. He cradled a single blackened gauntlet, Lysander's, in his hands, its weight a damning truth. He made no sound, his vow a silent tremor that shook the foundations of his soul. This promise was not for justice. Justice was a word for courts and kings, a concept for a world he no longer believed in. This was for an erasure, a methodical unmaking of every person who had a hand in turning his brother's love into a dagger. The gilded champion had to die to make this promise, and in that ash, Kaelen buried him. The man who rose was a stranger. The ideals he once championed for Veridia now tasted like poison on his tongue. Every victory, every parade, every memory of the bond forged in the hellfire of the siege was now tainted, a chapter in a grand, cruel deception. When the very bedrock of your world is revealed to be a lie, what is left to build upon but the ruins? He would not rebuild. He would grind the remaining stones to dust. The hero's code was a cage of honor, and now he was free of it.
His grief was no longer a wound. It was the whetstone upon which he sharpened his new and only purpose. This was not the wild rage of a wounded animal. It was the chilling, patient focus of a master hunter. The same discipline that made him a peerless commander would now be turned to a singular, dark art, a promise forged. This journey from profound loss to a cold campaign for retribution is a deeply human and terrifying path. We see its echoes even now, when personal tragedy curdles into an obsession that consumes the avenger as surely as it does their targets. Kaelen's new resolve was a glacier, moving with imperceptible slowness, but possessing the power to crush mountains. He would not be a storm, he would be the winter that follows, silent and absolute. His first move would not be against a king or an army, but toward a single forgotten name whispered in the dark. How does a man become a ghost while he still draws breath? For Kaelen, the promise forged in ash required not a sharpening of his sword, but the complete abandonment of it. He journeyed to the underbelly of the world, to places where honor was a currency for fools. In a damp, moss-slicked cellar beneath the city's forgotten aqueducts, a disgraced spymaster taught him the art of the unseen. The old man, whose fingers were stained with ink and secrets, showed him how a well-placed rumor could fell a general faster than any blade. Kaelen learned that to hunt the monster Lysander had become, he had to shed the skin of the hero he was. The righteous fire in his soul did not die. It simply learned to burn without light or warmth, a cold, focused singularity of purpose. He began the systematic demolition of his own past, severing every tie that bound him to the man he once was. The gilded armor of Veridia was sold, piece by anonymous piece, its luster vanishing into the grime of pawnshops and black markets. Letters of commendation, once his pride, became fuel for a small, bitter fire.
He practiced silence until his own name felt foreign on his tongue. A shadow's embrace. This was not merely the donning of a disguise. It was a ritual of self-immolation, an excruciating process of unbecoming. When a man sheds his own history, what truth remains to anchor him? He was erasing the evidence of his own life, ensuring that when he finally moved against his brother, the blow would come from nowhere, delivered by no one. The skills he mastered were those he once condemned. He learned the slow, patient language of poisons, understanding how a single drop of nightshade could unravel a dynasty. He studied the architecture of fear, the precise leverage points in the human psyche that could fracture loyalty and inspire terror. This transformation is a stark reminder of how a singular, catastrophic betrayal can irrevocably alter a person's moral architecture, a truth that resonates in our own age of fractured trust. The gilded champion was now a hollow echo, a story told to frightened children. In his place stood something new, something shaped by the abyss he had been cast into, a shadow's embrace. And now the specter he had become finally turned his gaze back toward Veridia, where a brother still sat on a throne built of lies. How do you destroy a king without drawing a sword? You take away the very stage on which he stands. Kaelen, now a ghost in the city he once championed, began his work not with steel, but with ink and whispers. His first target was not Lysander's life, but his legacy. He started with the grain shipments, a subtle disruption that soured the bread in the mouths of the people.
From a darkened garret overlooking the royal granary, Kaelen watched a trusted captain, a man Lysander had promoted, being dragged away in chains for a crime orchestrated by a single forged ledger. The gilded champion was gone, replaced by a patient puppeteer. This was not a warrior's justice. It was the slow creeping poison of a strategist. The strings tighten.
Each move was a masterpiece of calculated cruelty. He turned Lysander's closest advisors against one another, seeding paranoia with anonymous notes detailing true yet private indiscretions. The trust that held the court together began to fray. Could a man who built his throne on a brother's betrayal ever truly trust anyone again? Lysander, the betrayer, was now haunted by the fear of being betrayed himself. Kaelen savored this perfect, cold irony. His weapons, misinformation and psychological warfare, are the same tools used to destabilize nations from the shadows today. The battlefield has simply changed. The promise forged in ash was taking form. He was dismantling Lysander piece by piece, turning his kingdom into a gilded cage. But a ghost cannot remain unseen forever, and the next string he planned to pull was attached directly to the king's own heart. When two mirrors face each other, what do they reflect? An endless, dark corridor of self. The reckoning came not in a battlefield's roar, but in the chilling whisper of rain on cold stone. On the high parapet of the obsidian spire, where they had once sworn an unbreakable brotherhood, Kaelen finally faced Lysander. The city Kaelen had so carefully unraveled flickered with the orange glow of riot fires below, a grim testament to his patient phantom work. Lysander didn't turn at his approach. He simply spoke to the storm, his voice a low rumble. "I betrayed one man," he said, his words cutting through the wind. "You have betrayed an entire kingdom to settle your personal score." Kaelen's reply was a blade of pure ice. "You taught me that thrones are built upon broken things. I simply chose to break the throne itself, and every life propping it up." A promise in ash. The gilded champion was a memory, a ghost haunting the man who now stood there. In his place was the puppeteer, a creature of the shadows who saw people as levers and societal trust as a fulcrum for chaos.
The very methods of deception he once despised were now his most trusted and effective tools. He had weaponized the grain shipments, poisoned the wells of diplomacy with rumors, and turned neighbor against neighbor. All the things Lysander did in miniature, Kaelen now did at a catastrophic scale. But in destroying his enemy's world, had he not completely incinerated his own soul? His righteous promise, forged in the ash of his old life, had become a wildfire that respected no boundaries and consumed everything, including the man who lit it. This terrifying transformation, from victim to a greater villain, is not a relic of history. It is a deeply human story that plays out even today, where the pursuit of justice can curdle into a destructive fanaticism that consumes the very principles it claims to defend. Kaelen believed he was owed a debt of pain, a reckoning. But as Lysander finally met his gaze, his eyes held not fear, but a profound and shattering pity. "You still don't understand the reason, do you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "The dagger was never truly meant for you. What comes after the final, desperate blow of revenge? Only silence." Kaelen sat on the throne of Veridia, the cold iron a stark contrast to the rage that had fueled him for so long. Moonlight streamed through shattered glass, illuminating dust motes dancing over scorched tapestries where his own victories once hung. The crown, once a symbol of everything he fought for, felt like a leaden weight pressing him into the hollow world he had created. He won. Every dark scheme led to this. Lysander was gone. And with him, everything. The gilded champion was a ghost, a forgotten myth. The man forged in ash had completed his terrible promise, dismantling his betrayer's life piece by agonizing piece. But the fire of that vow, once a raging inferno, had consumed all its fuel. Now, there was only the cold. He had stared into the abyss for so long. He had forgotten the sun.
Was the man he finally broke in that rain-swept reckoning truly Lysander, or was it simply the last desperate reflection of the Kaelen he used to be? The cost of victory. He had mastered the puppeteer's game, only to realize he had cut his own strings in the process. He was no longer the hero of this story. He was the monster at its end, a cautionary tale whispered by survivors. In destroying his enemy, he meticulously adopted all of his methods, perfecting them until no trace of his former self remained. This journey serves as a timeless warning. The path of pure vengeance is a circle, and its only destination is self-destruction. He was the king of a ruined world, his kingdom the barren landscape of his own soul. There are no more echoes in the abyss, only the abyss itself. He was utterly, profoundly alone, the sole inhabitant of his masterpiece of destruction. There was no one left to fight, no one to blame, no bond left to sever. He sought justice, but found only desolation. He craved retribution and received only emptiness. Now sitting on a throne of ash, a new terrifying question began to form in the quiet. What does a king with nothing left to lose do next?